Training for a trail race can be really difficult, even when everything goes right, which is super rare, and even rarer when you're a parent, because there's just so much going on in your life and other things you have to consider. So I brought on Lexi Miller, who is a trail runner and a coach and a writer, to talk about training as a parent. She had a ton of great advice to share, from everything from how to find the time to training in and around pregnancy to managing your expectations. If you're a parent or considering becoming a parent, I know you're going to get a lot out of this one. So let's get right to it with Lexi. Welcome to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will Frantz, and I'm here to help you improve your training so you can have more fun out on the trails. This week on the podcast, I have Lexi Miller. Lexi is a coach and author for Trail Runner Mag, as well as many other publications like Training Peaks, the software we both use, etc. So, Lexi, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today. My name is Lexi Miller. I am a coach alone by myself currently. I used to work with a company called Lifelong Endurance. I am now Wild Miles Running. I coach about 40 athletes, ranging from mountaineers, ski racers to trail runners, marathon runners. Kind of my bread and butter is marathon and ultra running. And then, I enjoy writing a lot. I write for Trail Runner, have some articles coming out shortly with I Run Far, as well as Marathon Handbook as well.
That's awesome. Love that. And if I will link to your At Least Trail Runner page, and then so people can read your stuff, because in researching, it's great. You write some really good stuff. So I have a question before we get into the main topic of the day. Is like, I saw that you worked with a wide breadth of athletes. I mean, they're all endurance focused, but like, how did you get into working with mountaineers, and like, how does that maybe differ from training someone for running a 50 or 100 miler if someone's thinking to maybe like dabbling elsewhere?
Yeah. So I am a mountain girl here in Colorado, born and raised. I grew up in a pretty outdoorsy family where
Cool.
we spent summers and everything outside, mountaineering, going on sea kayaking adventures. My parents were teachers, so we had lots of time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Once I started coaching runners, I started looking at what the similarities were to people who had backpacking goals, mountaineering goals. It started off with, some of my athletes were kind of dual sport folks, where they would be training for an ultra or marathon and be like, hey, by the way, I'm going to do the Appalachian Trail next summer. How can we prepare? So research it. I mean, there's not like a certification for mountaineer coaching.
Sure.
But there's a lot of books. So Steve House is like one of the premier writers on the topic. He wrote or co-wrote Training for the Uphill Athlete, as well as New Alpinism, which are really helpful books. A lot of the same data is going to apply. So I use Training Peaks software, where we're going to look at total stress score, intensity factor. Somebody who's training for mountaineering, backpacking, even some ski mountaineering, once it gets to skimo racing, it's going to be way more similar to running, but they're going to do more in zone 2. We're not going to do as much high intensity. We're going to do some more weight loading. And then as we go into strength training, kind of looking at how we're loading the body opposed to, the efficiency that we're going to use for running. I am actually in the process of hiring another coach to work with me who is primarily mountaineer climbing focused, because I do think it is a specialty that, is going to grow in the coming years.
I love that. And it's some stuff that like I've dabbled in a little bit, and weirdly had kind of the opposite. One of my first clients was actually getting ready to get up Everest. And it was not just me, it was a team of people helping this man, and he did very well. But it's, I agree, it's similar, but there are some specialties, and I definitely don't know enough to do something big like that by myself. So that's awesome.
Well, thanks. Yeah, you live in another great place for it. I know Salt Lake has amazing.
Yeah, they're everywhere. Like my flat runs are still 1,000 feet of elevation. So yeah, 100%. So as far as like main topic today, I want to talk to you about parenthood, because I coach a lot of parents. I'm at the age where a lot of my friends are having kids, but I am not one. So I wanted to get a like perspective from someone who is one and who's written quite a bit about the topic. So if we're looking at running, let's say as a new parent, what considerations might we have to look at on a broad spectrum, and then also just from a like how do you find the time, man, because like it's really busy.
Yeah, so I mean, what you can relate to is we all go through changes in our life, right? Like whether it's you go to college, you are in a new relationship that's taking up time, you adopt a pet, they're all going to be events that are going to change how we go through the day for a while, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think the first thing is not holding yourself to the same expectations that you did before the big life event. So for a woman, this might happen during pregnancy, that as we go through pregnancy, we're going to realize that different parts of our life aren't going to fit in the same way they did before. You're going to need more rest. You're going to need more calories. Your body may not perform how it did 8 months prior.
Mm-hmm.
For parents who might be adopting, or for non-birthing parents, this event's going to happen more like when the child enters their life, right? So they're going to have more of a sudden, oh my gosh, everything is different. And again, still holding themselves to that grace of, I'm not going to be able to get out for a 4-hour run with a 1 month old. Like realistically, if you're going to do your due diligence as a parent, that might not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Is I think as we go into it with grace, as we go into keeping a structure in our life, it's going to be helpful. So what that might look like is, you come home with this new wonderful little baby and you want to spend all the time with it, but still giving yourself 30 minutes a day for recovery or for light exercise. So if you're the birthing parent, that might be, handing off the little one to a trusted caregiver, a parent, your spouse, and doing some like very gentle stretching, some very gentle strength, engaging the core. Going for a walk is amazing. And doing that ideally by yourself so that you can kind of start to regain that like system. Sometimes you need to, wear the baby, push them in the stroller. That's great too. Just like make sure that you're giving yourself that 30 minutes a day. One of the reasons this is so important is as you get to the point where you're able to train again, you're going to still have that consistency in your life, and you're not going to be shocking your system yet again of being like, oh my gosh, now I need to train. Most doctors, physicians, nurses, midwives, whoever, will not recommend that you run for at least 12 weeks after giving birth.
Mm-hmm.
At least with a vaginal birth. A C-section
Sure.
might be different. But you can start to incorporate other activities, cycling, walking, hiking, paddle boarding earlier on after 6 weeks.
And if we look at the C-section, since it's fresh in the brain, like how might that change? I've heard it can be longer, but I honestly
Mhm.
don't know if it could even be shorter. Like if you're
Yeah,
if you're cut open, obviously, yeah. So like how does that change it?
exactly. So it's going to vary person to person,
Okay.
which of course is like that little
Yeah,
adage that's said for everything in training or life.
sure.
Um, Usually it'll be more than 12 weeks just because of impact. However, sometimes people are able to heal a little bit faster. Um, it's just gonna be important that you have a trusted team, again, whether it's a midwife, a physician, whoever, who you can check in with, and then they will give you the go ahead.
That's great. And I feel like you mentioned taking 30 minutes like to yourself. My end, and not to necessarily compare the two, but for at least a couple months, they're pretty similar. I adopted a new puppy this year, and he was just a lot of work. And I knew that going in. But being single and alone like this, there's no one else to be there. So it ended up like not having any space to myself for multiple months, and it got a little mentally taxing. Do you feel, aside from the training benefits, like there's a marked positive to taking just some space to yourself on a fairly regular basis?
Yeah. So I mean, so puppies are a great example too, right? Like obviously humans and puppies are different, but I can also
Sure.
say like, I have a new puppy as well. And it a lot of ways, like it's, you can set down your kid in a bassinet for a second and take a minute to yourself. With a puppy, it's a little bit harder, right? You're gonna
Mm-hmm.
hear about it. So I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially when we look at rates of postpartum depression, Um, a lot of a corresponding feature is that women, primarily women, because that's who's studied, right? We can talk
Hmm.
later about how men can also suffer from postpartum depression,
Sure.
but women lose a sense of self. So taking that 30 minutes, especially if you can like be outside in the sunshine, regaining some sense of self that isn't just being a mom, feeding your child, holding your child, is going to be huge. And it's the same with a puppy, is like you might need to put the little one in a kennel for another 20 minutes and just get outside by yourself for a minute, go for a run, because you can't run with a new puppy. So it's we have to preserve our mental health to be better caregivers. In the article I recently wrote for Trail Runner, I interviewed a top athlete who has two young children, and she talked about how she feels like she's more on it as a mom when she gets out for a run and exercises by herself before coming and getting her kids in the morning. So even though she's getting a little bit less sleep, even though she's, you know, putting in more effort alone, even though that might seem selfish, it makes her a better caregiver later on in the day.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I found for myself and a lot of the parents I coach as well. Like if they take just a little bit of space, they honestly feel like even though they're being selfish in the moment, they're allowed to be they're able to be less selfish in the
Mm-hmm.
grand scheme of things.
Less checked out, more
Yeah.
more mindful of the actual experience when it's happening.
Yeah, 100%. And like, how do you find the time? Like, I think that's the big thing, especially for, not else you're not going to be running a 100 miler within 6 months of giving birth anyway. But like, how do you find the time? And that is a thing for parents across the board. If we're coaching someone to run an ultra, time is always the factor. So, like, what do you find to be really useful to make that happen?
Hey everyone, I've decided to stop doing ads for this podcast, at least for the time being. I just don't think they're a good use of anybody's time. So instead of that, I just have a simple ask. If you find this information valuable, please tell someone about it. Either hit the like or subscribe buttons on your preferred platform, share it with somebody, or you could even just head over to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, and I'd appreciate that as well. I'm just trying to make more good, free information for people so we can all get better at running on the trails. And if we can spread the tribe, that would be great. Thank you, and let's get to the podcast.
Time is always the factor. So, like, what do you find to be really useful to make that happen?
Yeah. So I mean, this is where you need to kind of start asking for help. Help can look a lot of different ways for different people. And I think that's something that we're going to talk about, that not everyone is going to be in a two-partner household. Not everyone's going to have family nearby, or family that can be trusted nearby. But there are resources. So gyms with childcare are fantastic. Most local rec centers, YMCAs, will have at least an hour of childcare. Sometimes they'll do up to 3 hours where you can leave your child with a trusted caregiver. I think it's after 6 weeks, as most places, 6 weeks or 2 months. Once they're vaccinated, usually, just like puppies.
Mhm.
Where you can leave your child and get in a workout. You can go. I mean, I know treadmills are not always the ideal, but you can get some time on the treadmill. You can
Yeah.
lift. You can take care of your body. If you have a partner that you are co-parenting with, you can start to have that conversation of, what do I need in a given week? What are our goals? What my husband and I talk about weekly is, what are our professional goals this week? What do we need to accomplish work-wise? What do we need to accomplish like recreation, training wise? And then other wants we have. Is there a project we're working on in the house that we really want to work on? Is there something we want to do as a family we want to do together? And having that conversation at the beginning of the week, putting it in a shared calendar so it's not one person's responsibility to keep track of, is helpful in kind of budgeting time. So when I'm training and I need to get in a 4-hour run, truth be told, I have not run an ultra in the 2 years I've been a mom. I've run long
Sure.
races, but an ultra just hasn't been the top of my priority list at this
Sure.
time. But when I was training for a 35K trail race that I wanted to do really well in, I would say, hey, I want Saturday to be my long run. Do you need support with the kid that day? Cool. You have other things you want to do. Let me see if I can have a parent come and watch him. Or, okay, you're good. Let's look for some things you guys can do together. The museum is having a special exhibit on dinosaurs. Why don't you guys go do that on Saturday and I can go for my long run? And communicating that rather than expecting a partner to just anticipate the needs that you're going to have in your training. The other thing is sometimes you got to bring the kid with you. So I would say one of the most important things you can do prior to bringing home a child is working on upper body and core strength, because pushing that stroller, you can log some good miles, especially before your kid
Yeah.
is walking and like cares that they're in a stroller for a long period of time. When I was training for Boston Marathon 9 months postpartum, my son and I put in some serious long runs in the baby jogger with just like, I'd sing, I'd chit chat, he'd look at books, like we would do whatever we could to like get through a 16-mile run. And it gave me a little bit more freedom in training. And then finally, backpacks are another great way to get in some good trail miles with the kiddo, with the family, and making it more of a family event.
All of that. And I particularly appreciate the, like, you said you don't just need to, or don't expect that your partner's going to like know what you need, right? Like actually make this a conversation on the regular. I feel like that is an issue that arises between partners, whether or not kids are involved. Just like maybe a weekly check-in to be like, hey, are we doing well? What do we need to fix? Like what's going on here? Like actually putting that in the calendar seems like a really useful thing.
Yeah, definitely a lesson that took me a couple of years of marriage to figure out. Now we're
Yeah.
cruising, but yeah, first couple of years where you just anticipate your partner knows what you want doesn't go well.
Yeah. I mean, kind of learned that throughout relationships. And it's a thing that I'm definitely going to implement in the future for sure. So if we're looking at maybe a partner, so that's assuming that your partner is like super supportive, right? And like actually like willing there. And I actually don't even want to throw any partners under the bus. I just think that sometimes, say your partner's not a runner, they don't fully understand like what this might mean to you. How can we maybe work with a partner who on the surface is, and in most areas of life is really supportive, but in this realm maybe isn't, even if it's unintentional, the most helpful?
Yeah, so there was actually a cool study done by the Pew Institute that looked at like happiness in relationships.
Mm.
And usually one that, again, this is done with mostly heterosexual couples, so we'll use men and women in this situation because that's what the study is done with.
Sure.
But usually men felt as though they were being a supportive partner. Uh, and then when they found out they weren't, there was less happiness in the relationship. So things were flowing the best, reporting the most, like, um, fulfillment in a relationship when they felt not only that they were supported, but also supporting their partner. So one, I would say if you feel as though your partner is not supportive, let them know what you need, just like we said before, because
Mm.
I would say the majority of people are good and they want to see their partner succeed, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and hearing why something is important to you, hearing your why, hearing the reasoning you need training, you need to get out and fulfill these goals is going to make them feel better when they're watching the child, helping with dishes, etc. The other thing that I've seen come up with athletes, at least when it comes to parenting, is if the birthing parent is breastfeeding, that the kid is pretty connected to them. It's gonna be really
Mm-hmm.
hard for the other partner to spend time with the child because every 30 minutes to 2 hours, the feeding parent is going to need to be with the child.
Mm-hmm.
So explain to your partner other things they can do to be helpful, saying, hey, I really need to get out for a run today. It's going to have to be in 30-minute increments because I have to feed this kid. Can you please do dishes? Can you please like go to the grocery store? Can you let me sleep in a little bit or go to bed early so that I can feel rested for my long run? And being very direct with the needs. If you have a partner who just really does not get it, doesn't understand why you're training to do a 100-mile race, doesn't really like crewing, it's going to be hard. And I think that's where, if communication isn't working, you're going to have to find other supports in life because it's easy enough to say like, well, maybe you need a new partner, but like, that's not easy, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we just have to kind of deal with people, thorns and all, right?
Yeah. 100%.
So that's finding childcare that's going to work for you, finding a supportive running community where you can share childcare with friends. I have a system of friends where we have that kind of relationship. Finding I think again, mostly this is going to be, historically has been a female issue. So finding a mother's group where you can go for a run, have support, find affordable childcare, because getting a babysitter at $20 an hour for a long run isn't always going to be financially reasonable for every person.
Yeah.
Kind of making it happen and sticking to your why, sticking to the reasons why you want to be successful and not letting these obstacles hold you down, because eventually it'll get better and eventually your kid will be able to be self-sufficient for a couple of hours while you go and run, but it may not be immediately.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes a bunch of sense. And I agree. I feel like if your relationship is like, let's say, picture perfect in every realm except maybe this, like, yeah, they get a new partner recommendation kind of sucks, right? Like it's I understand the inclination, but it's just finding some other sources of support. And to me, this is actually one of the reasons it's really our modern world's very difficult. Like, I love technology. I love that you and I are able to do this interview from like 800 miles away. However, it also like creates this like extended community rather than one that can actually help us in the moment. And so yeah, finding that like local piece for you is really helpful.
Yeah, it's
So,
huge.
so like how have you gone about finding that? Because honestly, I think it can be really challenging for some people.
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate in my area. One thing I found is a childcare co-op.
Hmm.
So this is how I get work done as a running coach. As you know, work can flex, right? Like some days are
Oh
really
yeah.
busy, some days aren't. You don't always know how many clients you're going to have if there's going to be a pandemic that you're going to lose 50% of your clientele. So
Yeah.
it's an affordable childcare option where I go to a co-working space, my kiddo is there playing with other kids, and then I also meet other moms, other people who are passionate about the outdoors. I'm outside of Boulder, Colorado, so that's pretty much everyone. Um, I would also say, again, there's things like Trail Sisters where you're going to get connected with other women. Again, assuming that the primary caregiver is going to be female. That's not
Mm-hmm.
always the case. And then going, like I said, you really can't underutilize a free childcare system like what's found in a lot of recreation centers. Um, Honestly, and this is where technology is actually pretty great. We're going on Facebook, going on forums, and finding out what exists in your area, getting connected to other runners who are parents is going to be
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Um, there have been some studies that I think it's if children have 6 consistent caregivers before the age of 5, they have like increased sociability in life. So they're just going to be kind of
Interesting.
more outgoing, like connected humans and find that community. So it's hard. I mean, any person who's tried dating in the modern world can also say this is hard, right? Like finding friends and
Yes.
finding community is just as difficult as finding a partner online. But once you find the right one, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's trial and error. It's finding people you trust. It's reaching out and being outgoing, even if that's not your demeanor, and connecting, because overall it's going to be better for you and your kiddo in the long run.
Yeah. I love all of that. And I feel like I'm trying to remember the name of this or meetup. There's meetup, and in certain environments it's better than others. But like when I was traveling a ton abroad, I would use that along with like I did couch surfing. So like just kind of spreading the net really wide and being willing to give it a shot and see how it goes. And I will double down on your recommendation for Trail Sisters. I have a few people in my crew in the local area in them, and they're just a delightful group of people. So
Yeah, they're always so encouraging and come from all walks of life. So whether you're a parent or you're like, nope, never ever, you'll probably find like an awesome running buddy in that group.
absolutely. And like all walks of skill level too.
Mhm.
Like that's why I want to double down. Like one woman I'm training is done in a few miles, and then somebody else who's leading the group just like summited Rainier. So it's like this whole like range of skill levels. It's fantastic. So I feel like some of this comes back to something you mentioned before we hit record, and I don't know if balancing is the right word, but coming to some kind of harmony with the mental load of work in the household. Like how can we assess that? How can we keep some balance of that long term? I realize like mental load shifts day to day. Sometimes you're at 90 and another person's at 10 and vice versa. But long term, we're trying to like hit this somewhat even spectrum. How do we do that well?
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky, right? Like again,
Mm-hmm.
any person like we living alone or with a partner, there's a lot that comes with it. So one thing is keeping track of each other's tasks in a relationship. Any person who's been in a longer relationship, you just start to take on certain things without speaking about it, right? Like one person will usually start to cook the food, the other person might I almost said balance a checkbook, but who balances checkbooks anymore, right? Might like use the banking app. Obviously that's not
Sure.
my job. Considering I was like balancing checkbooks, that's still relevant, right?
Oh, God.
And so it's, everyone will take on tasks. Once kids are introduced, usually that goes to, one parent primarily. If you're going to consistent childcare, there might be a little bit of a break during the day where that person is at work, but otherwise they might be doing a little bit more in the evenings and overnight, which is, I think, the biggest thing, especially with new kids. The Family and Work Institute put out a study in 2001 that 38% of heterosexual couples split the routine fairly, and then 74% of same-sex couples split it fairly. So there was a little bit less of a disparity between same-sex couples as heterosexual couples. So when we think about that, less than 40% is split evenly. Primarily it goes to the female partner who's doing the child care, cooking, cleaning, a lot of times also planning events for the family. So we think of just like everything that's that mental load.
Mhm.
And the reason we think about this mental load or invisible labor is because it's taxing. Think of any time you've like tried to organize a group run or like get friends together for something. It's a lot. You're coordinating, you're trying to figure out everyone's schedules. And then if we're adding in like meal planning for 3 to 5 different people, depending how many in your family, making sure everyone's needs are being met, making sure everyone's getting to bed on time. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's rare that it's going to be 100% fair, right? Like there's always going to be one person who's doing more. And that's where I think those check-ins are important. There's apps where you can kind of share the tasks for the week, and each partner can look and be like, oh shoot, like Sally cleaned the kitchen and did all the shopping and all the cooking. Maybe I should take the kids to ballet practice or whatever it is. And then you can kind of like actually see it. For our household, it was a whiteboard where it was writing down the things that need to be done and we could check them off. And then it was like you could see who was checking off even amounts. And then the other thing I started doing so that it doesn't feel discouraging, because no matter what, no matter how fairly it's split, it can be exhausting, being an adult, let alone like a parent and running a business or working
Yeah.
professional. I'm sure you're exhausted running a business, and like having puppies are exhausting.
They're a
Um,
lot, man. Yes, I am
they're a
tired all the
lot.
time. I love him, but I'm tired all the
Yeah,
time.
exactly. And so I started just like keeping an app or a note in my phone of like anytime my husband did something I was grateful for. And then at the end of the week being like, hey, by the way, I really appreciated XYZ. So then he was feeling seen. And then sneakily, I was encouraging him to do a little bit more every week. So if he was like, oh, hey, it felt good that Lexi appreciated that I cooked dinner on Friday night, it would happen more frequently. Because when we're seen and not feeling like we're being ignored, we tend to get more energy, right? Like that's probably what you see coaching. When you tell an athlete, hey, fantastic work, they're going to go out for that next workout with like a little bit more enthusiasm.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think some people benefit from that more than others. And that would also be a really important thing to maybe check in on
Oh, for sure.
and see if your partner needs that, right? Like some
Right.
people are very much like no news is good news. And then other people are like, why have I not heard anything in the past little while? And having been in a managerial position in my mid-20s, I'm more than no news is good news thing. And being told like, hey, you need to give positive feedback was news and also very helpful. It resulted in much better work output. So yes, I feel like it's funny. I also use something like similar to a notes app where it's like, make sure that you mention this. And yeah, it's a really helpful thing to do, and it does make the other person feel much more. It makes them feel like they are supported, and it makes them feel the support that you actually have for them.
Yeah, I mean, and there's the love languages, right? Like people
Yeah,
are going to be words of affirmation. Some people are going to be, acts of service. It's just you're going to need to figure out your partner and what makes them feel seen and valued in your relationship.
absolutely. So on all this, we're talking about like largely partnered relationships, be it same sex or not, or opposite sex or whatever. We've been mostly talking heterosexual, but I realize that's just where the data lies. What if you are in single parenthood? Are there, obviously it's harder. How do
Yeah.
we make it a little easier than super stressful?
Right. So again, this is where I can talk about research. I'm fortunate to have a pretty involved partner. But I've worked with athletes where they might have a partner who travels a lot, which is not quite singlehood, but also where they're just like, it could be
Yeah.
months where someone's deployed. Or I've worked with single parents, and there's going to be different situations with some folks. If they're sharing custody with a child, it's going to be highs and lows, right? Where it's going to be high work output, but they might feel kind of sad and depressed when the child's gone. And, learning to balance that in your life of like, okay, maybe the week or the weekend where you don't have your kiddo is a good time to like schedule some group runs, do a run with a friend, get out for some major miles, like go hard on the training, but then also be kind to yourself, like, and schedule your time that's going to be productive to you. If you're in a situation where you're just flying solo all the time, one that's, I like, hats off, because I would be so exhausted.
Seriously.
But that's where that whole it takes a village is going to really come through, where it's going to be incredibly crucial that you find a support system, whatever that may look like to you. Again, if you're fortunate enough to have family who can watch your child, reaching out to them, utilizing that as much as you were comfortable with. If it's going to be, finding another parent, maybe another single parent where you can trade off childcare so that you can get some time to yourself. If you're able financially to invest in childcare, even if it's not necessary as often, that's again going to be just crucial to keeping your own mental well-being. And it, unfortunately, for a lot of people, it might be a time where you don't need to put goals on hold, but maybe go for some shorter goals until you're in a place and your legs are under you where it's not going to stress you to train, right? Like nobody's going to be successful if they're pouring from an empty cup. Whether that's with work, with life changes, with single parenthood. So, sometimes goals might change briefly, and just as long as you hold on to like someday you will have more time and have that availability again.
I love that. And I think something that could help and has helped me being single with a puppy is like both being pretty rigid in my scheduling, but also being willing to be flexible with that scheduling, right? So like I try to get stuff done in the morning, and if it needs to be pushed off, I can, but at least it's like, it's there, it's blocked out. And I try to like create the space for it and being very intentional with that.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Whether you're partnered or not, schedules are huge.
And so if we're looking at, or we've mostly been talking about after you're a parent and how to fit things in, like if we were looking at going maybe either into pregnancy or earlier, like while you were currently with child, how can we maybe run, like what are some good tips to do that? What are some good tips to keep yourself like strong and healthy and everything?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's going to vary person to person. So assuming somebody has a healthy pregnancy, there's no underlying issues. You can really, especially through the first and most of the second trimester, keep training pretty similar to what you were doing previously, not starting anything new. So if you've never lifted a weight in your life, like probably not the time to go like to CrossFit classes. But if you've been logging in some serious miles, hitting the gym, like keep on keeping on as long as your body's feeling good with it. First trimester, that's going to be the biggest change for a lot of women, because that's when a lot of hormones pick up. So that's where a lot birthing parents report feeling morning sickness, sluggish, just not having the energy to do anything. This is again where I have worked with athletes, was just saying like, just try and keep some consistency. This workout may not happen for you, but like just get out for a 30-minute walk instead. If that's what your body is going to do, it's going to feel better than just like snuggling up on the couch and feeling sick. As far as heart rate, there's varying guidance much as like you should get your heart rate up during pregnancy. Usually if you keep within 85% of your maximum heart rate, you're okay. That's what the Center of Obstetrics and Gynecology is recommending currently. So you think that's like 85% is going to be, just around zone 3. You're not going to be good enough for those like high speed workouts, but you can get some quick turnover. You can enter some fun races and have a good time. There are birthing parents who run marathons, 50Ks while pregnant, and they're fine. There's absolutely no correlation to low birth weight and an active pregnancy. But if things don't feel good, if you're feeling cramps, if you're getting lightheaded, if you just don't feel okay, like cut out the activity, go see a doctor. And you'll be seeing you'll be checking in once a month, assuming that you are abiding by like recommendations. So that's a good time to like check in with a doctor about activity. The only things that aren't encouraged for women are anything with a fall risk. So skiing isn't recommended. I skied through most of my pregnancy. It was fine. But skiing isn't recommended, wakeboarding. You just have to know your own risks as you enter them.
Got it. I feel like there's so many, being in the personal training space in my day to day, like I feel like there's so many pieces of advice and recommendations from doctors, and some of them are up to date and some of them are not. And like I still hear occasionally the like don't pick up over anything over 20 pounds rule. Like period. I think that's out of date. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I've heard that as early as like somewhere in the first trimester, and I'm just like, I think we're kind of in the 1980s here with this advice. Like I don't know. So yeah, I mean, if
strength
something,
training is huge.
yeah.
It's super important during pregnancy. So most of
Yeah.
this information I got either through research or an interview with an OBGYN about what she was saying were the most common practices. So yeah, strength training is super important. As the Dr. Jenny Draper is the one I interviewed. What she said is it actually really helps with assuming that you're able to give birth vaginally with pushing. It can also help with recovery. So whether you had a C-section or a vaginal birth, you recover faster if you already have some strength training, especially in the abdominal, hip abductor area. So
Yeah.
I think the only thing that again is like going to vary is laying on your back can cut off blood flow. It could lead to like, if you're doing it for extended periods of time,
Yeah.
could lead to less flow to the baby or to your brain, which like both are bummers. So like, maybe support your back if you're laying on your back.
And most of the stuff you do on your back, like you can do also otherwise. So like those I do tend to cut. But yeah, the lifting thing was always odd to me, because I mean, like I'm helping this one woman stay under 20 pounds because that's what her doctor told her, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to violate medical advice, even though she and I chatted still, scope of practice. And then there's this other woman across the gym, like cleaning 115 while like clearly pregnant. You're just like, something is wrong here. I don't know where, but something is wrong here. And I just want to double down on the strength work. Like almost every woman ends up with diastasis recti at the end, where their stomach like separates. It's super normal. It happens. You grew a human. You did a hard thing, but like going into some strength and then like reconnecting to your transverse abdominis afterwards is exceptionally important for long-term health.
Oh, for sure. And, there's a lot of times if you have insurance, they'll cover you to see a physical therapist afterward. I recommend it for every athlete I've worked with, and myself after giving birth, is like seeing a physical therapist working on the diastectes rescue. I can't say it, but separation of the abs, pelvic floor. No one wants to pee while they're running. That's not fun. So just getting that taken care of to make it an enjoyable sport again. You don't have to be in pain.
I think the peeing while running is more common than we often talk about. And I feel like I don't know, some people I talk to just feel like it's normal. Like opinions on that. I have my own, but what are yours?
Yeah, I mean, it's super common. It doesn't mean that you should live with it. No athlete I have worked with has enjoyed that experience of going out for a run and leaking or feeling like they can't run downhill because they leak. again, a pelvic floor therapist doing Kegels while you're pregnant will like help with that re-strengthening the area. Women who have more than one kid, it's a little bit tougher to rebuild the area, especially if both were vaginal births. But again, go get help. It's not something you should be embarrassed about by any means. Like
100%.
sometimes it just happens, but like you shouldn't have to live with it. It's unpleasant.
Yeah,
Like
no,
it's
it
just like
sucks.
any pain in life. Like you shouldn't have to deal with it. We live in the modern world. There's doctors and physical therapists and strength trainers who are all here to help us. Like, don't be in pain.
Yeah, and I really appreciate both when the females I coach are open with me about that, while also like, yeah, I mean, some have had 4 kids and it's just kind of hard, but others like just didn't know pelvic floor PT was a thing. So if you don't know that and you're leaking, they exist and they're fantastic. So if we're looking at like, so going into pregnancy and then recovering post, we talked about this a little bit, but like, what can the disparity look like between people in that? From what I read Kara Goucher's book, I know it's pretty wide, but like you're clearly a data person. What does that disparity actually look like between people?
Again, so there's not great data because we can like talk about the anecdotal. But I mean, one of the biggest issues I feel with pregnancy and training is that there isn't a whole lot of research.
Mhm.
Not a lot of time is put into seeing how athletic females respond to pregnancy and postpartum. Things that can come up is one, you're just going to get less sleep. So your body isn't going to recover the same as before. And
Sure.
that's going to be for
Yeah.
both parents, whether birthing or not, whether you adopt, no matter how this child entered your life, likely you are not going to sleep the same as you did previously.
Mm-hmm.
A good rule of thumb is like as you go into activity, if your resting heart rate is 10 beats per minute higher than it usually is, to tone down activity or to make it a recovery day, just so that you're healing up. Sleep is going to trump everything else. So like, obviously we want to keep that consistency, but like if you need to get in an extra hour of sleep while your kiddo is sleeping, and that means that the kitchen's going to stay dirty, that you're not going to get in the long run, you just do a short run, whatever it is, like that's going to be the most important in those early days. And then physically, there's just a lot that can happen with the body. There's some birthing parents who bounce back full of vigor and life, and they're running, sub 8-minute miles without a problem. And then there's others who like, are going to take years to feel like themselves again. In one of my articles, I spoke to a professional runner where she talked about even her 2 pregnancies, where the first one, it took her 2 years to feel like herself. And the second one, she gave herself plenty of time to recover. She didn't do a single structured workout for, I think she said 9 months, and then was running at an elite level at 11 months. So
Wow.
it's the same person, 2 different pregnancies, 2 different ages. It's also going to depend on how active you were able to stay during your pregnancy. I was fortunate with my son that I was able to run up until 2 days before giving birth. It was slow. I was like actively eating peaches while I was running, but like I was able to run. There's other people that just how the baby's laying in their stomach, that might be resting on their bladder. It might just be like at an uncomfortable position, go like resting lower, that they just have to stop running at 6 months. So the fitness that you had going into birth is also going to dictate how quickly you're able to quote unquote bounce back. Kind of a term we're not using anymore because there's, it's harder than bouncing back. It's going to be
Yeah.
just like any injury, right? Like you've worked with injured athletes. Maybe 2 people have torn their meniscus, but their recovery from that's going to look starkly different depending on who they are and their experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work with a lot of injured athletes, and it's very comparable, honestly, between the post pregnancy and injury. And it's because your body did hard stuff and it's trying to come back together. It's what it is. It can take a long time. But I guess one question I had that just came to mind is if you are going to run with your kid, what would someone be looking for in a running stroller, or like making things that work in like backpacks and all this stuff? Like what would actually be a useful thing to look for there?
For sure. So one great thing, if you're planning on running pretty early on, is getting a travel system with your stroller. So that means that you can hook that little car seat up to the stroller, and as little infants aren't able to sit up, they can't sit in a regular jogging stroller, but you're able to put the car seat in and run with them, I think as early as 2 months, which is fantastic.
That's cool.
Amazing. Same with the carrier. Is early on, you have to have a soft carrier on your front facing in, one that you can get that will adapt to like facing out and then on your back. It's going to be trying on gear and figuring out what works for you, especially if both parents will be using the gear. It's going to get a little funky, right? Because like my husband and I, there's a 6-inch height difference. So a pack that works for me isn't necessarily going to work for him. Usually I'm more of the one who's like ambitious about getting out for the day. So if we go for a family hike, I'll be carrying the child. And so we found stuff that fit me better. But if you both will be sharing that quote unquote load, literally, finding something that will feel comfortable for everyone. As far as a jogging stroller, unfortunately, there's not like a great trail option. There's some that might call themselves all terrain, where you can get like on some gravel. That's fantastic. Some like Burley or Thule are going to be nice and light. We use the Thule Chariot, which converts to skiing, biking, and running. So it's an all-in-one stroller and fantastic for, it obviously is an investment, but the amount that we've used it has truly been life-changing. Same with the good hiking pack.
That's awesome. I love that, like, you have those options. And if we look at like, I appreciate that you said like also fitting it to the dad and make her other parent and making sure that we like can at least maybe have that option if possible. Because there's no partner I've ever dated where we would fit the same. I'm just broader than, but yeah, for sure. So I guess one thing that I wanted to come back to that cycled, and this is a bit of a left turn, but you mentioned postpartum in men. And we talked a little bit about postpartum in women, but if you have anything more to say on that, I would love that. And then as someone like, I struggle with depression. I don't know how much you know about me, but that's definitely a thing that I'm pretty open about. So like, how can we find this balance? Like what fits? Like if I don't move, I get depressed. So some of that's just priorities, but like, what do we work with that?
Yeah. So I think especially with a non-birthing parent, what happens is I had 9.5 months to process that I was pregnant and going to have a child, and started making those changes ahead of time. It was very real to me that this little person was going to come to my life and like things were going to look different. For my husband, it was a very stark change. And to go from having all the freedom in the world, one-on-one with your spouse, where like you have this great partnership and support, and then suddenly your spouse is all consumed with another little creature, and you're without that support, with a huge life change, not sleeping, which as we know for mental health is major, and maybe not feeling as validated as the female partner. Again, looking at heterosexual relationships where I gave birth to this child, and the baby and I are so connected, and we're spending all of our time together. And it's this wonderful, beautiful thing that maybe my husband doesn't feel a part of. Already being prone to depression or anxiety can be huge. What happens with female or birthing parent postpartum depression or anxiety is all these little hormones in our brain go crazy. And I don't think it's that different with male. However, I think also losing your major support partner is a big part on the male side. So life change, no support, feeling not valid or needed in your partnership, and then not sleeping is just a recipe for a lot of sadness. I think one of the biggest, disparities, usually I'm all about like talking about how women aren't getting the fair treatment, but this is the side where the male aren't, is like lots of people were checking in with me to make sure I was okay. I don't think a single person, like professional or otherwise, checked in with my husband's well-being after becoming a parent. So I think whether it's your friend, your colleague, your running buddy, if they've just brought a new little person into their life, like check in with them, make plans with them, go and see their baby. Because I know on my side, I had all sorts of people all the time ready to help me, see me, talk to me. It doesn't exist as much on the male end. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on male postpartum.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I realize that, like, as you said earlier, the mental load often goes to the female partner, especially in heterosexual couples, etc. But there is this, and in this modern space of like lack of connection we have, like I have had quite a few friends like have kids lately, and I see both struggle in different ways, and there does seem to be less support, or at least like upfront support. So I appreciate you saying all that.
Yeah, well, like I said, check in with your new dad friends. They probably miss you.
Yes, absolutely. So I know we're kind of coming up on end of time. One thing I wanted to ask you also is like prioritization. You said like ultras haven't been on the top of the priority list lately. Like, is that just like priorities have shifted or they've had to shift? Like, how's that looked for you?
Yeah. So I mean, part of it is running my own business is a lot of time. I have a lot of
Yeah.
professional goals, and as you know, it's really hard to put in the time of training when you're trying to build a business. Um, Another piece is I truly really love spending time with my kiddo at this phase of his life. I will never get this kid at this age ever again. And he's at a point where development is huge, where he's learning a lot every single day. I'm fortunate with my co-working space where like he and I are together almost every day. I get to see him interact with his friends, I get to see him grow, and I get to work. I had actually been signed up for the Wasatch Trail 100, and looking at that training load and what I was going to have to ask of my partner to get
Yeah.
that in was just, there was no way I could feel okay about that with our situation where I'm already asking for a lot of support in starting my own business and running my own business effectively. And to be like, okay, but I'm also going to need 12 hours a week to train. I can do some of that before it's light outside, but also to train for a 100-mile trail race, I'm going to have to drive to the trails and run. So that could be 7 hours out of a Saturday, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that's a lot. It was just something I didn't feel good asking my partner to do, even though he's incredibly supportive. He is a runner himself. Like he gets it. He said, go for it. But I knew it was going to be a big ask. And then missing that time with my son was just something I didn't feel okay with at this time. Um, I'm also at a point where working on speed is just a little bit more fun for me. I'm having more fun trying to get my 5K time back under 20 minutes, which it was before I had a kid. Um, and it's just like it's more attainable to get out early. I also chose to get a dog, which, like, as you know, makes, I had my old dog pass away last fall, and then
Uh,
got a new puppy, and it was like, oh yeah, that's right, you don't get to run much for the first year.
yeah.
So it was choices.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that I'll be back to running ultras in the next 5 years. It's just right now, biking to playgrounds and going for 10-mile runs is just more appealing.
Beautiful. And I just appreciate that priorities can shift. I think we end up in this space sometimes that once you do, I don't know, everybody's always chasing the next mileage or the next big thing or more elevation or whatever. Or I'm an ultra runner, so I have to run ultras. It's like you can be an ultra runner and take 2 years off and get faster. So just like hang with your kid. I don't care. Like you're an
Yeah.
adult. So yeah, I really appreciate that you sharing that and everything that shifts around. One of my favorite, I've been very openly appreciative of Heather Hart's like biking midlife crisis. I'm actually gonna have her on here to talk about it, but just your priorities are allowed to change. And I love that yours have and that you're gonna get back to it eventually. But just enjoying this time in your kid's life is wonderful.
Yeah, it's anything in life, right? Like whatever you choose, like you can be happy and not, like, you can be a runner without running. You can
Yeah.
take breaks, you can do other stuff, you can get
Yeah.
really into cooking, whatever. Just be happy. We only
Yeah.
get one life, in my opinion. Maybe we get more, I don't know, but
Yeah, no,
uh
I feel the same way. I feel like we like ram ourselves into this space and then like sometimes you lose the love of it or you want to pursue a different realm and you just feel like you can't because you've been very rammed in this space. And it's like, no, you absolutely can. Like, go do something else. It's fine. Yeah.
well,
Well,
thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I would love to have you back on here, as I said before. So let's like try and set up another one of these soon. But do you have anything else you'd like to share with people? For definitely like give your website and information and Instagram and all that stuff. And I'll make sure to link it in the show notes. And then other than that, like I really appreciate you being here.
No, I appreciate it too. Thank you so much. Good luck with the rest of your day.
Thanks. Like what is sorry, what is your website? Like how do people find
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
wildmilesrunning.com. I'm on Instagram, Wild Miles Running. And then you can find all my writing on Muck Rack, which is just my freelance page. If you're looking for a freelance writer, I'm for hire. So if anyone has any SEO content they would like written about really boring topics such as muscle cramps or that like sciencey side of running, let me know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Hang on for a second, Lexi. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. And Lexi will definitely be back on. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Honestly, I'm still surprised and honored that anybody wants to hear what I have to say, so thank you. To be clear, not a doctor, nor a registered dietitian, or any other kind of medical professional. I'm a personal trainer, a nutrition coach, and a running coach, and I have a passion for training trail runners. You should always speak with a qualified medical professional before making any changes to your training or nutrition program. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please take a second to leave a rating or review. I'd really appreciate it. Or you could just share it with someone for whom you think it might be helpful. I make these kinds of things in order to provide more quality, free resources to people, so the more people who hear it, the better. If you want more of this information, please head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training group on Facebook, where we discuss all aspects of training so you can have more fun doing the sport that you love. Thank you again for listening.